Keanu Reeves thought his childhood nanny was just a kind, quiet woman who made cookies and told bedtime stories. Until she died and left him $25 million, 0 cents, and a key to a hidden basement beneath her house. What he found down there revealed a secret so bizarre, it could change everything he believed about his past. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The house was still. Outside, a gentle rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Keanu Reeves's Los Angeles home. It was nearly midnight, but sleep was far from his mind. A half-finished script sat open beside him, pages marked with pencil notes and lines underlined with care. The dim light from a reading lamp spilled across the room, casting warm shadows on the hardwood floor. Keanu sat in a deep leather chair, flipping slowly through the pages. His mind wasn't fully on the script. Something about the night felt different, like a memory trying to surface. Then, his phone vibrated. The sudden sound broke the silence. He looked down at the screen. A number he didn't recognize. It began with +27. South Africa. Touching, 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 touching. Nothing. He hesitated. Most of his calls at this hour were either emergencies or wrong numbers, but something urged him to answer. Keanu pressed the green icon and brought the phone to his ear. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Mr. Reeves?" The voice was calm, male, with a slight accent. "My name is David Stein. I'm a probate lawyer based in Johannesburg. I'm very sorry to disturb you at this hour, but I'm calling with some news regarding a woman named Lucia Alvarez." Keanu blinked slowly. "Lucia Alvarez," he repeated under his breath. That name hadn't been spoken to him in years. A flood of childhood images rushed forward. A woman in a floral apron, gentle brown eyes, the scent of cinnamon toast in the morning. Lucia had been his nanny when he was a child living in Toronto. She had practically raised him during some of the most turbulent years of his early life. His mother had worked long hours. His father had been gone. "Yes," Keanu said quietly. "I remember her. I haven't heard from her in decades." There was a pause on the line. The lawyer's tone softened. "I'm sorry to inform you that Ms. Alvarez passed away last week." Keanu felt something sink in his chest. He closed the script on his lap and leaned forward, resting his elbow on his knee. His voice lowered. "I see. Thank you for letting me know." "She mentioned you in her final will and testament," the lawyer continued gently. "In fact, she left something for you. Quite a lot, actually." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Left something for me?" "Yes, sir. She left you an inheritance." Keanu's voice remained calm, but now tinged with confusion. "I think you have the wrong person. Lucia was a nanny. She lived simply. She didn't have—" "He left you $25 million, the lawyer said evenly. The words didn't register at first. Keanu's mouth opened, but no sound came out. $25 million? He repeated slowly. "Yes, Mr. Reeves. And that's only part of it. She also left behind some personal belongings specifically for you. Letters, photographs, documents, and a request." Keanu stood up. He began pacing the living room slowly, running a hand through his hair. His thoughts scrambled to keep up. "That doesn't make sense," he murmured. "She used to take the bus to work. She wore second-hand clothes. She saved every penny. She made cookies from scratch and gave me crayons wrapped in tissue paper for my birthday. She was humble." "Yes," the lawyer said quietly, "but not who she appeared to be." Keanu stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" The lawyer's voice remained calm, but his next words unsettled something deep inside Keanu. "Lucia Alvarez was not a poor woman, Mr. Reeves. In fact, her estate records show ownership of multiple assets in South Africa, Argentina, and Canada. Several business holdings are still being assessed, but the official valuation at time of death exceeds $200 million. Keanu stood in the center of his living room, frozen. Rain tapped louder now against the window, as if echoing the disbelief that spread through his chest. "I don't understand," he said slowly. She lived in a small duplex. She used to bring her own tea bags to save money. She once darned my socks when I tore them on the stairs. She was the gentlest person I knew, but rich? Business holdings? "I know this is difficult to believe," Stein replied. "It surprised us too. Her accounts were deeply concealed, registered under trusts and offshore names. We only discovered the full scope after decoding a series of handwritten ledgers she left behind." Keanu sat back down, but this time on the edge of the couch. He stared at the floor, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would she do that?" The lawyer paused, then continued with more gravity. "Lucia left a letter addressed only to you. She also left a personal request. She said you would understand. In time." Keanu looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of request?" "He asked that you return to her house in Toronto. She said it would explain everything. The documents, the photos. She said you'd know where to look. Her exact words were, 'He'll remember the old pantry.'" That phrase stirred something. A smell, a sound, a long-forgotten image. Lucia standing beside a tall kitchen shelf, smiling as she handed him cookies wrapped in wax paper. "Don't tell your mom, Keanu," she'd whisper. "Secret hiding place." The memory struck him like a spark against dry tinder. "She used to hide snacks behind the flower jars," Keanu murmured, almost to himself. "Then you already know where to begin?" Stein said gently. Keanu's eyes lifted. The room felt colder. "What else did she leave?" "There's more," Stein replied. "Aside from the inheritance and the personal items, she left surveillance records. Detailed ones. We're still going through them. Mr. Reeves, Lucia had been watching you. For decades." Keanu's breath caught. "Watching me?" "Yes, sir. There are photographs, notes, audio tapes, some dating back to your earliest childhood and some much more recent." A strange silence followed. Keanu stood again, but slower this time. "How recent?" The lawyer hesitated. "Within the last year." Keanu felt the room tilt slightly. His own heartbeat echoed, louder than the rain now. He rubbed his hands together slowly, grounding himself in the moment. "All right," he said finally. "Book me a flight to Toronto. I'll be there tomorrow." The lawyer confirmed the address and said the keys, letter, and documentation would be waiting at a small notary's office in downtown Toronto. Keanu thanked him quietly, then ended the call and placed the phone down beside him. For a long time, he didn't move. The rain had slowed to a mist outside, clinging to the window like dew. Inside, the silence felt different now, no longer peaceful. It was heavy. Something about the way Lucia had slipped back into his life, even in death, unsettled him deeply. Not because of the money, that didn't matter to him, but because Lucia had always represented simplicity, innocence, a gentleness untouched by the chaos that filled much of his childhood. And now that image had shattered. $25 million, surveillance files, hidden ledgers, offshore accounts, all tied to the same woman who used to hum lullabies while brushing cookie crumbs off his little shoulders. It didn't make sense. He rose and walked to the shelf near the fireplace. There was a small wooden photo frame tucked between books. He picked it up. It was a faded photograph, one of the few he still kept from those days. It showed him as a child, maybe 4 years old, sitting on a worn kitchen counter, laughing with a spoon in his hand. Behind him stood Lucia, smiling, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. She was wearing a pale blue apron. Around her neck, the same necklace he remembered even now, a silver pendant shaped like a tree, its roots and branches woven into a perfect circle. He had never asked her about it. As a child, it had just been part of her, like her voice or her smell or her calming presence. Now it felt like a clue. Keanu returned the photo to the shelf. He turned off the reading lamp and walked toward the hallway. His suitcase was already out, half packed from an upcoming appearance he had planned to cancel anyway. This time it would serve a different purpose. He would go to Toronto. He would walk back into that tiny home with the red door and the creaky steps. He would step inside the place where so much of his early world had unfolded, and he would find out what Lucia Alvarez had truly been hiding all those years. As he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why me? He had never asked for anything from her, beyond warmth and kindness, and she had given it freely. But now she was reaching out across time, across death, calling him back to something hidden, something strange, something unfinished. The wheels of the black car crunched slowly over the thin sheet of snow blanketing the neighborhood. Keanu sat quietly in the back seat, gazing out the window as familiar streets passed by. Toronto had changed in many ways since his childhood, but here, in this quiet residential pocket, where the houses were modest and the trees stood like old sentinels, everything felt eerily unchanged. It had been years since he'd returned to this part of the city. There were places he had avoided, roads he chose not to drive down. Too many ghosts, too many echoes of a boy who didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But Lucia's house, that place had always felt safe. The car slowed to a stop in front of a small brick home with faded green shutters and a single step leading to a red-painted door. Keanu stepped out into the chill and pulled his coat tighter. The air smelled like winter and old pine. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached the porch. The door opened before he could knock. A man in a dark coat and gloves stepped forward and extended a hand. "Mr. Reeves." "David Stein. We spoke on the phone." Keanu shook his hand firmly, nodding once. The lawyer reached into a leather bag and pulled out an envelope and a small silver key. "This was left for you by Ms. Alvarez. Everything she wanted you to see is inside. The house is yours for as long as you need it. We've already arranged for the utilities and security. You won't be disturbed." Keanu accepted the items, his fingers brushing against the thick weight of the envelope. He looked up at the house. The porch light flickered faintly, just like it used to when Lucia would sit beside it with her tea, waiting for him to return from school. "I appreciate it," he said. "If you need anything, I'll be staying downtown. My number's inside the folder." Keanu nodded again and turned toward the door. As the lawyer walked back to the car, Keanu stood still for a moment, the key cold in his hand. Then he stepped inside. The scent hit him first, a faint trace of cinnamon and pine cleaner mixed with something floral he couldn't quite name. The house was exactly as he remembered. Tight hallway, low ceiling, wooden floors that creaked beneath every step. The walls were adorned with the same watercolor paintings and lace curtains Lucia had always loved. Her slippers were still by the radiator. He walked slowly to the kitchen. Everything was just as it had been: the olive green tile, the pale yellow cabinets, the antique teapot on the stove. He set the envelope down gently on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a thick bundle of photographs, aged but carefully preserved. As he spread them out, his breath caught. There were photos of him as a toddler, cradled in Lucia's arms, photos from his first school play, one from the hospital waiting room the night his sister was born, another from a movie set in Prague, taken from a distance. He stared at that one the longest. He had never told anyone he was there that day. He flipped through more of the photographs. Some were yellowed at the edges, others printed on modern glossy paper. And then, there it was. A picture of him from just 6 months ago, exiting a bookstore in New York. He remembered that day. It had been drizzling. He had stopped to help an elderly man who had dropped his bag. There were no paparazzi around, no press, no fans. Just a quiet moment in a quiet corner of the city. But someone had been watching. Beneath that photo was a short note written in delicate, slanted handwriting. "You've always been good." even when no one was looking. The truth is inside. Look, where we used to hide cookies. Keanu set the note down, heart pounding now not from fear, but from a strange fusion of affection and dread. Lucia's words felt like they had reached across time, stirring a part of him he hadn't visited in decades. He stood and walked to the far side of the kitchen. The pantry was still there. Tall, wooden, slightly tilted on one side. Its door creaked the same way it had when he was little. As a child, it had been a magical place. Lucia used to hide ginger snaps and molasses cookies behind the tins of flour and sugar. She always smiled when he found them, pretending to be surprised. He opened the pantry slowly. Rows of baking supplies lined the shelves, untouched but preserved. Cans of beans, a box of old brown sugar, jars of dried herbs. But something was off. He crouched down and ran his fingers along the back panel of the lowest shelf. The wood didn't feel like the rest. It was newer, smoother, almost recently installed. He knocked once. It echoed faintly. A hollow space. He pressed inward. Click. The back panel popped open with a gentle sigh of dust. Behind it, a narrow opening revealed a small black iron handle. Keanu reached in and pulled. The shelves swung outward, heavy but smooth, as if the entire pantry had been built as a disguised door. Behind it, darkness stretched down into a hidden passage. A narrow wooden staircase led into the earth, illuminated only by a single flickering bulb overhead. "Thad, you gonna stop all that?" Keanu stared at the opening. He didn't move for a full minute. Then he stepped back, grabbed a flashlight from the hallway cabinet — Lucia always kept one by the tools — and returned. He took a deep breath, and then, slowly, he began to descend. The wooden stairs creaked softly beneath Keanu's weight as he moved deeper into the passage. Dust lingered in the air, and the walls narrowed the further he went. The flickering bulb above barely reached past the top few steps. He clicked on the flashlight and cast its beam downward. The narrow corridor below looked more like a forgotten cellar than anything he remembered from his childhood. He reached the bottom. The space was cool, dry, and silent. Stone walls surrounded him. Hand-laid bricks, some of them chipped, others darkened by age. But it wasn't the walls that caught his attention. It was what stood in the center of the room. A metal cabinet. Industrial. Old, but clean. And beside it, a wooden chest sealed with 2 iron clasps. There was also a small desk tucked into the corner, stacked with yellowed papers, several file folders, and a single framed photograph. Keanu walked to the desk first. He picked up the photo. It was of him and Lucia, taken in the backyard. He was maybe 7 years old. Lucia was laughing, her arm gently looped around his waist. Someone else had taken the picture, someone not in the frame. Beneath the photo sat another note. "Forgive me for what I hid. But it was the only way to keep you safe. You were never meant to know. Until now." Keanu set it down carefully. Then, with steady hands, he opened the first file folder. Inside were documents: contracts, birth certificates, surveillance logs. Some were in Spanish, others in Afrikaans. The dates stretched back to the early 1970s. The names on the pages were unfamiliar at first. Then he saw his own name. Again and again. One document listed him as a protected subject. Another referenced a contingency fund transferred to a South African account. Lucia's name appeared under multiple aliases. But most chilling was a photo clipped to the final page. A grainy zoomed-in image of Keanu from the set of one of his most private projects. It had been taken from a great distance. No fans, no cameras. Except hers. He looked at the metal cabinet. His hand hovered over the latch, heart pounding. Then he pulled it open. Inside were dozens of videotapes, each labeled with a date, some from the 1980s, others more recent. A small screen was mounted beside the tapes, along with a dusty VCR player. A note rested on top of the machine. Start with July 9, 1991. Keanu's hands trembled now, not with fear, but with something deeper: dread, curiosity, a sense that his past, the one he had carefully built in his own mind, was about to unravel. He slid the tape into the player. The screen crackled, and his childhood began to play. The tape ended in silence. Keanu sat frozen in the chair, the grainy screen still flickering with static. The footage had shown him as a young man, walking through a film studio parking lot, unaware of the camera following his every move. But it wasn't paparazzi footage. It was too smooth, too calculated. Every moment had been chronicled with purpose. It was surveillance, clear and intentional. And it hadn't come from a tabloid. He turned slowly toward the far side of the basement. Something about the wall didn't sit right. It was too smooth, too clean. Keanu rose from the chair and walked to it. He pressed his hand along the bricks until he felt a small, recessed panel. Instinct guided him. He pushed. A low mechanical click echoed through the stone chamber. Then, the entire wall shuddered. It slid open. Behind it lay a staircase, stone, winding downward into what appeared to be a much larger subterranean space. Cold air rushed upward. Keanu hesitated only for a second. Then he stepped inside, gripping the flashlight tighter. A few seconds later, the cabinet. The stairs descended deeper than he expected, far deeper than a typical basement should go. The air grew colder, denser, as if laced with silence itself. When he reached the bottom, what lay before him took his breath away. It was a vast chamber, wide, circular, and impossibly deep beneath the earth. The ceiling rose at least 30 feet, curved like the inside of a dome. The walls were lined with tall shelves, filled with weathered books, maps, documents, and strange metal devices that emitted a soft hum. In the center stood a long steel table and a wooden desk. Both were lit from above by a single hanging lamp that swayed ever so slightly, casting shadows that danced along the floor. Keanu stepped forward. On the desk sat another envelope. His name was written on the front in Lucia's familiar handwriting. He picked it up and sat down. The envelope was heavier than expected. Inside there was a thick letter, written on ivory paper and folded with care. He unfolded it, his hands shaking slightly, and began to read. My dearest Keanu, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But that was always the plan. I never wanted you to find this before you were ready. And I knew one day you would be. You always had a quiet strength. Even as a boy, there was something in you that reached beyond this world. I knew from the beginning you would ask why. Why I was always there. Why I disappeared. Why I pretended to be nothing more than your caretaker. It's time you knew the truth. Keanu blinked, the words blurring slightly. He kept reading. I was not just your nanny. I was your watcher, your guardian. I was placed in your life long before you could speak. Not by accident, but by design. I came from a lineage that stretches back further than this country, further than this continent. And I wasn't poor, not even close. I was born into a network that controls more than anyone dares to admit. I was the majority owner of mining operations in Namibia and Botswana. My name never appeared on paper. I used proxies, shadow companies, and encrypted codes to protect my identity. I had shares in early tech startups in Cape Town and Argentina, 2 of which now power military-grade satellites. But that was only a part of it. The real secret, the one buried deepest beneath the surface, is why I was chosen to protect you. Keanu lowered the letter for a moment, his mind trying to process what he was reading. Mining? Satellites? A global network of assets? Lucia? The woman who once patched up his scraped knees with cotton balls and sang to him when thunder frightened him? It didn't seem possible, but the details were too precise, too real. He continued, "You are part of something older than money, older than governments. You were born with a thread that connects you to something few have seen and fewer still can name. We called it the legacy. Others have called it the path. It's not a religion, it's not a cult. It's an inheritance, one that comes with great risk and even greater responsibility. Your father never knew. Neither did your mother. I kept it hidden for your safety and for mine. But there are people, those who understand what you are, who have watched, waited, and prepared. Some mean you well, others do not." The letter was written without flourish. Every word felt deliberate, precise. There was no attempt to dramatize or confuse. It was a simple unveiling. Keanu reached into the envelope and found a second item, a folded map. When he opened it, he saw a hand-drawn layout of the chamber he now sat in. It showed the bookshelves, the desk, the devices, but also a small mark at the far wall labeled simply Vault. He turned toward the wall and saw what she meant. A circular steel door, almost unnoticeable in the stone, stood embedded behind a bookcase. He hadn't seen it before. The bookcase was on wheels. He pushed it aside gently, revealing the entrance more clearly. The letter's final paragraph read, "There are items behind that door that belong to you now, but they are not of this world. Or rather, they do not belong to the world as it is known. You'll understand when you see them. And if your heart is the same one I knew all those years ago, I know what you'll do next. With love always, Lucia." Keanu folded the letter and held it in his lap. His mind wasn't racing. It was still. Like something inside him had been waiting to hear this all his life, even if he hadn't known it. He stood and turned toward the vault. The steel door stood silent and cold, embedded like a relic from another era. Keanu approached it slowly. In the center was a brass dial, unmarked but well-worn. He ran his fingers over the edges. Then, from the bottom of the envelope, he pulled out a small object that had slipped behind the letter. A medallion, circular and engraved with the same tree-shaped symbol Lucia used to wear around her neck. It fit perfectly into the center of the dial. He pressed. There was a faint whir, followed by a deep click, and the vault door slowly rotated open. Inside was something that defied every expectation. The room was perfectly preserved, like a sealed capsule, untouched by time. The air was still and carried a faint scent of lavender and aged cedar. Along the far wall hung several tapestries. Symbols stitched into them with golden thread. Maps were pinned to corkboards with pins marked in different colors, red and silver dots connecting remote corners of the world. Namibia. But the centerpiece was what stood beneath a spotlight in the middle of the vault, a sleek metallic case about the size of a violin, resting on a pedestal covered in velvet cloth. Keanu approached it with a mixture of reverence and suspicion. He unlatched the case. Inside lay a long silver object. Not a weapon, not a tool, but something unfamiliar. It shimmered faintly, as if lit from within. Along the handle were grooves for fingers, and etched into the side was a symbol that matched the tree pendant. He touched it lightly. The object pulsed once, a soft light rippling through its frame. Behind it lay a thick journal bound in black leather. Keanu picked it up and opened to the first page. Beale Notes, Artifact 7C, Assigned Guardian, L. Alvarez, Potential Successor, K. Reeves, DNA markers confirmed, timeline advancing faster than projected, subject unaware. He flipped through the pages, each one filled with diagrams, ancient symbols, and references to lost civilizations, alignment cycles, and what Lucia called veins of convergence, points where energy, memory, and inheritance intersected. It read like science fiction, yet every word had a weight that felt grounded in something unshakable. Keanu set the book down. He stepped back from the pedestal and looked around the chamber. This was no mere basement. This was a vault of legacy, a map of something deeper than history, and for reasons he didn't yet understand, he was at the center of it. Lucia hadn't just protected him, she had been preparing him. And now, the world he thought he knew, one built on cameras, scripts, and quiet moments of kindness, had cracked open to reveal something ancient, hidden, and utterly strange. And it had been waiting for him all along. Keanu stood in silence for several minutes, surrounded by maps, journals, and the strange glowing object. But it wasn't the vault or even the shimmering case that held his attention now. His eyes had settled on a small black velvet cloth resting atop the second pedestal in the corner of the chamber. He stepped toward it slowly, heart thudding. On the cloth lay something achingly familiar, a necklace. It was silver, slightly tarnished by age but still gleaming in the low light. Its pendant was shaped like a tree, its branches fanned upward in graceful arcs and its roots twisted downward in a complex knot. Encircling the tree were faint, raised markings, symbols he didn't recognize, not from any language he knew. But the necklace wasn't new to him. Keanu remembered it. Lucia had worn it every single day. As a child, he'd watched it dangle over his cereal bowl in the mornings, glint in the sun while she hung laundry in the yard, and sway softly when she leaned over to kiss him goodnight. He had never asked what it meant. It had simply been part of her, as ordinary and unremarkable to his young eyes as her laughter, her accent, or the scent of her shampoo. But now, with everything he'd uncovered, the secret basement, the maps, the files, the journal, this simple pendant no longer felt ordinary. It felt intentional, symbolic. A key. He picked it up gently. The chain was still warm, as if someone had worn it just moments earlier. As he held it in his hand, he noticed something else lying beside it. A small, translucent orb, no larger than a marble. Unlike the other old and dusty artifacts, this orb shimmered with a subtle pulse of blue light. It almost seemed alive. Curious, Keanu reached out and touched the surface. The orb responded instantly. With a soft hum, it rose slowly into the air and hovered. The lights in the chamber dimmed. A beam of light burst upward from the orb, filling the dome with a flickering shimmer of movement. The air thickened, and then, Lucia's voice filled the room. Not a recording on tape, not something distant or old. Her voice was full, clear, and alive. "My dear boy, if you're seeing this, then everything I hoped for has come to pass." Keanu stood completely still. The projection rippled in front of him, images forming from the air like strands of memory weaving themselves into shape. A younger Lucia appeared, her hair darker, her face smoother, but the same gentle eyes. She stood beside a younger version of him, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, laughing in a park. The image shifted again, showing Lucia seated at a table, writing in a leather-bound book. The same one Keanu had just held. "You were always curious. But there were things I couldn't explain until now," she said. The projection shifted again, now showing Lucia sitting in what looked like a quiet cabin, snow falling softly outside the window. She wore the necklace, the same silver tree that now hung from Keanu's fingers. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, and her voice carried a weight that felt deeper than time itself. "My name was not always Lucia Alvarez," she said gently. "That name was one of many I used over the years. The truth is, I belong to a lineage known only to a few. We are the keepers of the lineage. Guardians, watchers, protectors of the children who carry potential." She paused, and the light around her dimmed slightly. "I knew of you before you were born. The signs were clear. Your mother was brave, your father reckless, but your spirit was different. Older, quieter, and not yet shaped by the noise of this world. I was chosen to watch over you, not to interfere, but to guide from a distance. To be near when you needed care, but never too close to disturb the path set before you. Images rippled through the air. Keanu as a toddler, giggling on a picnic blanket. Then in a classroom, eyes downcast as other children whispered. Then at 17, seated alone on a bench outside his drama school, staring at the sky. Each memory shimmered with silent intimacy. I hid who I was so you could become who you needed to be, Lucia said softly. You wouldn't have trusted me if I told you I held wealth or power or secrets. You needed love, kindness, a warm meal, a place to fall asleep without fear, so I became those things. Keanu blinked, hard, breath catching. The orb floated slightly higher now, and a second image appeared. Lucia with a group of people in ceremonial robes, standing in a circle around a massive tree with glowing roots. It looked like no tree he had ever seen. Its bark pulsed faintly, and at its base was the same symbol that hung from the necklace. This, she said, is the tree of continuance. It exists in a place beyond maps, a place few can find. It connects those born with certain gifts, not gifts of talent or beauty, but gifts of memory, of knowing, of carrying truths too heavy for the world as it is. Keanu's hand gripped the pendant tightly. You are one of them. The words echoed through the vault. The images began to fade, but Lucia's voice remained steady. It's time you understand who you are, Keanu. Not just who the world thinks you are, but who you've always been. Before the cameras, before the roles, before the loss. The orb pulsed once more, casting a final wave of light that gently filled the room. Lucia's face returned, older again now, matching the version Keanu remembered most vividly. The lines on her face were deeper, but her eyes were just as kind. The image lingered, as if she were waiting for him to breathe. I know this is a burden, she said softly, but it is also a gift. Most people drift through life never asking the deeper questions, never wondering why certain people feel familiar, why certain places stir something ancient in their chest. But you were never meant to drift. Lucia extended her hand in the projection. Though it passed through the air, Keanu instinctively reached toward it. There will be more, she continued. More to find, more to remember. Some of it will frighten you. Some of it will break your heart. But you are not alone. And you never have been. The orb dimmed slightly. In the vault, beneath the left panel in the floor, there's something else I left for you. Not knowledge, not power. Something simpler. A reminder. With that, the orb slowly descended back to its pedestal and shut off with a soft chime. The lights in the chamber returned to their normal hue, and silence settled over the vault once more. Keanu remained still for a long time, staring at the now dark orb. Her voice still echoed in his chest. She had known. All along, and she had chosen not to reveal anything until now. Not even when he wept after losing his daughter. Not even when his fame became global. She had waited. For this. He walked to the center of the room, where the pedestal stood, and noticed a faint seam in the floor to the left of it. He knelt down and pried it open. Inside the hidden compartment lay a small wooden box wrapped in deep green cloth. He unwrapped it and opened the lid. Inside was a photo. It was the two of them, taken in the park. Lucia on the grass, young Keanu asleep in her lap. Her arms were wrapped around him like a shelter, the tree-shaped pendant visible just beneath her collar. Tucked behind the photo was a pressed maple leaf, perfectly preserved between two glass panes. Beneath it all, a note in her handwriting. You were my life's purpose. I never told you because I didn't want gratitude. I only wanted you to be free. Keanu closed the box slowly, his heart heavier now, but steadier. Something deep inside had shifted. He wasn't just uncovering a mystery. He was beginning to remember who he had always been. The air in the vault still carried the echo of Lucia's voice, though the orb had gone silent. Keanu lingered in the room, not quite ready to leave. He felt tethered to this place, as if leaving it too soon might sever something delicate he hadn't fully grasped yet. He turned back to the shelves and began scanning through more of the documents Lucia had left behind. Many were organized meticulously in leather-bound folders, marked only with numbers or symbols, but one shelf caught his attention. Tucked into the far corner was a wooden box labeled in gold lettering, "The Forgotten Children." Inside were dozens of small folders, each marked with a name and a location, some in handwriting, others typed on fragile yellow paper. He began pulling them out one by one. There was Amahile Dubé, Johannesburg, now a global leader in medical imaging. Kaito Watanabe, Tokyo, who had helped pioneer biodegradable batteries. Maria Solano, Buenos Aires, an environmental advocate whose movement had reforested 500,000 acres. He paused. Each file included birth records, photographs, and handwritten notes by Lucia. Details about their personalities, moments of trauma, early signs of genius. She had watched them all, not just as a caregiver but as a guide, a quiet force pushing them gently toward lives of meaning. Then Keanu found his own folder. It was thicker than the rest. The cover was dark red and worn, the clasp more secure. He opened it slowly. Inside were photos of him as a baby, many he had never seen before. A note tucked inside read, "Photographs were taken only when no one else was present. He never noticed, but I was always there." There were pages of medical notes, scribbled behavioral observations, but what startled him most were the emotional reflections. Lucia had written as though she were narrating his soul, things no one else had ever been able to articulate. At 2 years old, he quieted when other children cried, not out of disinterest, but because he was listening. He watches pain. He doesn't look away. Even then, he felt responsible for the mood in a room. Keanu sat down and rested the folder on his knees. The next entry read, by age 5, he had stopped asking why his father wasn't around. He didn't want answers. He wanted to protect the people who were still there. The weight of absence settled into his bones early. It made him strong, but it also made him alone. Keanu closed his eyes. She had seen all of it, every silent moment, every unspoken fear, and she had written it all down, not for others, but for him. Keanu flipped through more of the pages, drawn deeper into a portrait of his childhood he had never known existed. Lucia hadn't just observed his behaviors. She had captured the invisible moments, the ones too small for memory, but too powerful to forget if you were the one watching closely. Each year of his early life was cataloged with care. Notes about his nightmares, his reactions to music, how he once cried for an hour after seeing a bird with a broken wing. She had written about how he offered his only blanket to a classmate during a school field trip when it started raining, and how, when asked why, he simply shrugged and said, "He looked cold." But then Keanu noticed something stranger. Tucked between the pages of medical observations and emotional insights was a small, sealed envelope. His name was written on it, not in Lucia's usual looping handwriting, but in something that resembled his own. But he had no memory of writing it. He broke the seal and pulled out a small sheet of paper. "Today I saw the sun come up and thought it was smiling at me. I think Lucia made the world be nice while I was asleep." The sentence stunned him. It sounded like something a 5-year-old might say, but in his exact tone. His voice, his rhythm. And then he found another. "Sometimes I pretend to be a cloud, because clouds don't have to explain where they go." Keanu set the letter down, his chest tightening. Lucia had written these entries as if she were inside his mind, as if she had recorded not only what he did, but what he might have thought, what he might have felt, long before he ever learned how to articulate those emotions. And somehow, impossibly, she had done it in a way that mirrored his voice, not hers. It was eerie and beautiful and deeply unsettling. He reached for the final item inside the folder, a small black book bound in leather, embossed with the tree symbol. Unlike the others, this one had no label, no explanation. He opened the cover and saw only 2 words on the first page: Keanu's journal. The pages that followed were dated, some as early as when he was just a toddler, but the entries were written as if he himself had written them. Expressions of wonder, fear, love, confusion. Except he knew he hadn't. He wasn't old enough at the time. He hadn't known the words, and yet they were his thoughts. His soul felt reflected back at him. It was as if Lucia had entered a part of him even he hadn't explored. Keanu turned the pages slowly, careful not to bend or crease them. The journal felt sacred. Each entry was a mirror, not of memory, but of something deeper, something subconscious. As he read, he felt both exposed and protected. Today, I didn't talk at recess, not because I was sad. I just liked listening to the wind. Lucia made soup again. She stirs like a magician, like the spoon knows the secret before she says it. I think kindness is a quiet superpower. It doesn't need a costume. He paused, fingers trembling slightly. These weren't just cute childhood thoughts. They were emotional truths, ones he had carried his entire life, often unspoken, even to himself. It was like opening a book written by the version of himself that existed before pain taught him to edit his feelings. Near the end of the journal, the entries began to change. They became more vivid, almost prophetic. Hell will carry loss like a lantern, and people will follow the light without knowing why. Fame will find him, but it won't change him. He will change it. One final entry stood alone, centered on the last page in Lucia's elegant handwriting, signed not as Lucia, but as L, keeper of the lineage. Will not rule, he will not command, he will remember, and in remembering, he will remind the world what it has forgotten. Keanu closed the journal gently, both hands resting on its cover. He sat back, overwhelmed. Lucia had given him more than history. She had given him an unfiltered reflection of his essence. Somehow, even before he had become who he was, she had seen it, named it, preserved it, protected it. He glanced once more at the other folders. Dozens of children she had watched over, all of them now adults, change-makers scattered across the globe. It struck him how quietly she had changed the course of so many lives. Not by force, not by recognition, but by presence, by love. And among them, Keanu was different. Not more important, but more detailed. He was the child she watched the closest, the one she believed would help hold the world together through compassion, not control. He let the words settle in. In an industry that valued performance, she had seen the soul. In a world obsessed with power, she had chosen a boy who cried for broken birds. Lucia hadn't just been his nanny. She had been his witness, his archivist, his quiet champion. And now she was asking him to take up her place, not to continue her legacy, but to fulfill it. Keanu sat in the center of the vault, still holding the black journal, his thoughts spinning in too many directions at once. Everything he had uncovered in the last hour felt too vast, too intimate, and yet oddly inevitable, as if all of this had been quietly waiting for him beneath the surface of his life. Then he heard it, a faint creak above. He froze. Another step, then another. Someone was upstairs. Keanu stood slowly, ears alert. The front door was locked. He hadn't heard it open. His mind raced. Was this someone sent by the lawyer? Another heir? Or something more sinister? He climbed the narrow staircase with quiet urgency, emerging into the dim, dust-scented kitchen. The air was still, except for one detail, a soft rustling, like fabric moving gently in a breeze. He stepped around the corner. A woman stood there. She wore a long blue dress, nearly identical to the one Lucia had always favored when she cooked. Her hair was dark, braided over one shoulder. Her hands were clasped in front of her, calm and composed. Her eyes locked with his. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. Something about her face tugged at a place deep in his memory. Her cheekbones, her stillness, the way she tilted her head. Finally, she said, "You look exactly how she said you would." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" "I'm Isabel," she replied. "Isabel Alvarez. Lucia was my grandmother." The name hit him like a current. He hadn't even known Lucia had children, let alone a granddaughter. "She never mentioned you," Keanu said cautiously. Isabel nodded. "She wouldn't have. That wasn't part of your path. Until now." Keanu remained silent, his gaze flicking to the hallway behind her. No sign of how she had entered. No keys, no coat, no umbrella. Yet the rain outside had barely touched her hair. "I've been waiting," she added, voice calm but firm. "Lucia told me you would come back, and that when you did, it would be time." "Time for what?" Isabel didn't answer. Instead, she stepped toward the counter and reached into the folds of her dress. From a silk pocket, she drew a pendant identical to the one Keanu had found. The silver tree with roots and branches. She walked toward the orb pedestal in the corner of the room. It had been silent since the last message ended. With a single motion, she placed the pendant onto the indentation beside it. The orb flickered to life. Then, with a mechanical click, a portion of the wall began to shift. A section of old paneling retracted, revealing a hidden doorway that glowed from within. Keanu stared in disbelief as pale blue light spilled out, casting crystal-like reflections across the floor. The crystalline glow from behind the hidden wall shimmered like moonlight through water. Keanu took a cautious step forward, drawn toward the light but still watching Isabel closely. "How did you know how to do that?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Isabel didn't hesitate. "Lucia taught me, for years." Keanu blinked. "She never said anything, not once." "She couldn't," Isabel said softly. "She was bound by the oath of witness. Until the final veil was lifted, until her life ended, she wasn't permitted to reveal the next in line. That's why you didn't know I existed. That's why I stayed away." Keanu took another step, eyes darting between the newly opened chamber and Isabel's unwavering calm. "She raised me in secret," Isabel continued. "Not just as her granddaughter, but as her successor." Keanu clenched his jaw. "Successor to what, exactly?" Isabel turned toward the glowing doorway and gestured for him to follow. "To the lineage. You're the reason it stayed dormant all these years. She couldn't risk exposure, not even for me. But now, it's time for you to see what she protected." Keanu hesitated, then followed her through the narrow passage. The walls were lined with thick crystal formations, glowing faintly blue, humming with a quiet resonance he felt more than heard. They passed through a short tunnel that opened into a circular room, domed and grand. The ceiling stretched high above them, covered in reflective stone that seemed to shift with every movement. In the center of the chamber was a pool of still, illuminated water. Above it hovered a holographic map of the world, slowly rotating. Tiny lights pulsed across it, points of energy, moving and vanishing, reappearing and dimming. Isabel approached a second pedestal and pressed her palm to its surface. The hologram zoomed in, focusing on a particular region. South America, then Africa, then Southeast Asia. "Keys," she explained. are the places where the keepers once operated openly, before the world turned away from the quiet ones, before wealth and power became louder than memory. Keanu looked at her, stunned. Are you saying this is some kind of global network? Isabel shook her head. Not anymore. It's a memory of what used to be. The keepers never ruled. They watched. They preserved. They whispered to the ones who needed reminding. Lucia was the last active keeper, but now that she's gone, she looked him in the eye. You're not just her legacy, Keanu. You're her chosen. He felt the weight of the words settle in his chest, heavy and strange. And for the first time since Lucia's passing, he didn't feel alone. Keanu took a slow breath as he stood in the middle of the crystalline chamber, absorbing the reality of what Isabel had just told him. His mind tried to process it all. Lucia being more than just a nanny, Isabel being trained in secret, and now this silent invitation to step into something he never even knew existed. Isabel approached the water's edge and looked down into the glowing pool. Lucia called this room the Chamber of Echoes, she said quietly, because it doesn't just hold light, it holds memory. When someone stands here with intention, it reveals what needs to be remembered, not just by them, but by the world. Keanu turned toward her, his voice steady but guarded. Why me? Isabel didn't smile, but there was warmth in her expression. Because you were the only child she never tried to shape, she just watched. And she believed that your strength came not from what you could do, but from what you refused to become. She reached into a hidden drawer in the pedestal and pulled out a cloth-wrapped object. With careful hands, she unwrapped it and revealed a metallic bracelet, etched with the same tree symbol. Beneath the roots, one word was engraved in delicate script. Steward. She wanted you to have this, Isabel said, not to burden you, not to control you, but because she believed you'd know what to do with it when the time came. Keanu took the bracelet in both hands, his reflection shimmering in the pool beside him. The weight of it was real, but more than that, it felt familiar, like a promise made long ago and forgotten until this very moment. I don't know what any of this means, he said, his voice low. You're not supposed to, Isabel replied. Not all at once. Lucia left behind layers, clues, and I'm here to help you unfold them. Keanu looked around the chamber again, eyes lingering on the world map above them, on the glowing pulses that flickered like distant stars. Did she ever say what it all leads to? Isabel paused. She said it wasn't about leading. It was about remembering that our greatest danger isn't destruction, it's forgetting who we are. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, heavy with everything left unsaid. Keanu finally nodded, slipping the bracelet over his wrist. He didn't feel like a hero, or a chosen one, or the center of anything. He felt like a son remembering a woman who loved him more deeply than he ever understood. And beneath that, something was waking up. Something ancient, something true, and it had just begun to stir. Keanu stood still in the crystalline chamber, the bracelet tight around his wrist, glowing faintly with a soft silver hue. The map above continued to rotate slowly, the world suspended in blue light. Isabel moved to a nearby column and ran her hand along a subtle groove embedded in the stone. A hue began to build around them, the walls flickered. Then came the images. The first hologram bloomed into view like smoke catching sunlight. A little boy, no more than 4, chased a paper plane across a sunlit park. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. It was him. Lucia appeared behind the boy in the vision, sitting on a picnic blanket, a book in her lap. She wasn't speaking, just watching, her eyes filled with something more powerful than words. A soft voice filled the chamber. Not Lucia's voice live, but a recording made long ago. I used to wonder why some children fought for attention, while others simply observed, she said. You were always quiet, Keanu. Not because you didn't feel, but because you felt everything. Too much, too soon. More memories appeared. Lucia at the kitchen table, showing him how to knead dough with gentle hands. Lucia kneeling beside him in the garden, teaching him how to listen for the sound of roots cracking the soil. Lucia sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, reading from a book with strange symbols while Keanu asked question after question. Why does the sun make people happy? Why does crying feel good sometimes? Each moment hung in the air around them, not as mere recordings but as living echoes. Fragments of time preserved, not to be admired, but understood. The holograms shifted again. Now it was night. A thunderstorm outside the window. The younger Keanu sat in her arms, afraid, pressing his head into her chest. Her voice whispered above the rumble of thunder. You're safe, my little one, and one day you'll be strong enough to help others feel safe too. Then came Lucia again, not in memory now, but in a new, pre-recorded message. She stood in the chamber, aged, composed, wrapped in the same blue shawl she always wore on winter nights. Keanu, she said gently, if you're hearing this, then I am gone. But I've never left you. Keanu's chest tightened. You may think all of this is about mystery, but it's not. It's about preparation. Because something is coming, and the world won't recognize it until it's already here. And when it arrives, it won't need warriors. It won't need wealth. It will need you. Lucia's image remained steady as her voice continued. Her eyes didn't blink, but they seemed to shimmer with an emotion deeper than grief. There are many who will tell you that strength lies in force, that influence comes from control. But that's never been true for you. It never could be. Because you were born with something I only saw in a few children across the world. A sense of stillness in the storm, a way of seeing without needing to dominate, a heart that doesn't harden even after it's been hurt. The chamber dimmed as another memory projected around her. This time a teenage Keanu, sitting alone on a rooftop under a purple sunset. Lucia's voice overlapped the image. You never wanted the spotlight, and yet it followed you. You never sought power, and yet people listened. I used to think that made you vulnerable, but over time I learned your gentleness was your shield. Your empathy was your edge. The image dissolved, and another took its place. It showed Keanu during one of his earliest public interviews, nervous and soft-spoken, fumbling through kind words while avoiding personal questions. Lucia's voice came again, quieter now. The world taught you to hide that tenderness, but it's exactly what will be needed when the crisis arrives. Keanu's brow furrowed. Crisis? Isabel nodded solemnly from across the chamber. She spoke about it often. The moment when the world's illusions collapse. Not just governments or economies, but belief, faith. The stories people tell themselves to feel safe. Lucia's voice resumed, as if confirming Isabel's words. There is an unraveling ahead, she warned, a spiritual drought, a moment when the world will look for light and find only reflections. People will turn on one another. Kindness will be seen as weakness, and the loudest voices will drown out the wisest ones. Her eyes locked with the camera, with him. But there will be a small window, a chance, when the world will need not a savior, but a center. Someone who can speak without shouting, stand without pushing, heal without breaking. Keanu's heart pounded. Her words felt like they were being carved into the air itself. And that's why I never pushed you, she whispered. Why I let you stumble, doubt, grieve, disappear. Because you had to choose it. You had to arrive here on your own. You had to remember yourself. The final memory flickered into view. Keanu, as a young child, maybe 5, asleep beside Lucia on the couch. Her hand rested over his heart. Her eyes closed, her lips forming a silent prayer. And then she whispered in the recording, "They will follow your silence before they follow anyone's noise." Keanu stood frozen as the last image faded into darkness. The chamber became still again, but the air around him felt different, charged, alive with the weight of revelation. Lucia's final words echoed in his mind. "They will follow your silence before they follow anyone's noise." He turned slowly to Isabel, whose eyes were filled with quiet knowing. "I don't feel ready for any of this," he admitted. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." Isabel stepped closer. "She didn't expect you to know. She only believed that when the time came, your heart would know, before your mind could catch up." Keanu lowered his gaze, his thoughts drifting through decades of film sets, lonely hotel rooms, fan encounters, quiet mornings reading on his balcony, moments that felt insignificant, now stitched together by an unseen thread. Had Lucia been watching through all of it? Guiding without intruding? He walked back toward the glowing pool and looked down into the reflection. His face stared back, older, lined with stories. Behind him, the chamber reflected itself, as though offering another version of him he hadn't yet met. Everything she said. "About the collapse. Do you think it's already begun?" he asked. Isabel didn't answer right away. She moved to the pedestal and tapped a different section of the surface. The holographic globe returned, but now its lights blinked more rapidly, fewer steady pulses, more chaos in their rhythm. Some areas had gone entirely dark. She believed it had, Isabel finally said. That people were already losing the thread. That's why she prepared you. Why she chose you. Keanu watched the globe spin. "But I'm just one person. She never saw you as just anything," Isabel said gently. "You've spent your life trying not to be the center of attention. But in doing so, you became the only center people trusted." The truth of that statement struck him hard. He hadn't asked for this role, but maybe that was the point. Lucia hadn't wanted to train a leader in the traditional sense. She wanted to cultivate a soul the world couldn't ignore, not because it shouted, but because it stood still when everything else shook. Keanu turned back toward the center of the room, the bracelet on his wrist still glowing. The holograms were gone. Lucia's voice was silent now, but her presence remained. "I'm not who they think I am," he whispered. Isabel's voice was steady. "No, you're more." And in the stillness that followed, something unseen passed between them. Not a duty, not a destiny, but an awakening. And somewhere deep inside Keanu's soul, a quiet fire began to rise. The next morning, the light filtering through Lucia's kitchen window felt different, more deliberate, as if the house itself was urging Keanu forward. The bracelet on his wrist still glowed softly, but now it pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Isabel placed a black leather folder on the table and opened it carefully. "Keys were left in the pedestal chamber," she explained. "Coordinates, messages, financial accounts, all labeled under your name, and all pointing to others." Keanu sat beside her and sifted through the contents. There were names and locations, some cities he recognized, others that sounded more like code names. Tucked in the back was a list written in Lucia's looping cursive. Each name was followed by a single word: healer, inventor, singer, teacher, builder, witness. She called them her constellation, Isabel said. She believed you were the center star. Keanu ran a hand through his hair, feeling the magnitude settle over him. "And they don't even know?" "Some of them do," Isabel replied, "at least a little. But none of them know the full picture. Only you were given that." The first name on the list was Amari Sefton, an engineer, Vancouver. Lucia had drawn a small tree beside his name. Keanu looked at Isabel. "Let's go." They left Toronto quietly, no public announcement, no press. Just two travelers with purpose stitched into silence. The flight to Vancouver was uneventful, but Keanu couldn't rest. He kept looking at Amari's file, a small packet Lucia had assembled with care. articles about his early invention of modular wind harvesting towers, a photo of him at 16 grinning beside a prototype, a quote Lucia had underlined from one of his earliest speeches. "We can't save the planet by force. We can only make it irresistible to love." Keanu stared at that line for a long time. They arrived at Amaury's lab just outside the city, nestled in a converted greenhouse near the edge of a forest preserve. It was quiet, filled with humming generators and climbing vines. A small sign read, "Sefton Renewables, the future is rooted." A tall, wiry man in his 30s stepped out from behind a solar canopy, adjusting a micro-drone with one hand. When he turned and saw Keanu, his face didn't show surprise, just recognition. "I knew you'd come," Amaury said. Keanu froze. Amaury smiled softly. "I got her letter the day after she passed. It said, 'Prepare your part, the seed will walk in.' Took me a while to figure out what that meant. But when I saw the news about your visit to Toronto, I just knew." Keanu stepped forward. "She really got to all of us, didn't she?" Amaury nodded, in ways we still don't understand. Inside Amaury's lab, the air smelled faintly of mint and ozone. Hanging plants draped over recycled copper piping, solar panels tilted toward the ceiling like metallic sunflowers. It felt more like a greenhouse than a laboratory. Keanu glanced around in quiet awe. Amaury led them to a wide wooden table covered with sketches, circuits, and hand-built models. A large schematic on the wall showed a clean energy grid looping around rural villages in sub-Saharan Africa. Beside it, a photo of a laughing child holding a small wind-powered lantern. Keanu stared at it. "That's from Ethiopia," Amaury explained. "Lucia funded our pilot. We thought it came from some anonymous donor in South Africa. Now I understand it came from her." Keanu looked back at him. "She believed you could change how people experience the night." Amaury nodded, his voice quieter now. "And she believed you could gather us, not just to remember her, but to do what she couldn't finish." Isabel opened her satchel and placed Lucia's leather folder on the table. She turned to a section marked with a green ribbon and pulled out a card bearing a symbol of the tree with branching lines beneath it. "She left these for each of you," Isabel said, "but the messages are encrypted. Only those who were part of her constellation will know how to read them." Amaury smiled faintly. "Lucia always did love her puzzles." He pressed his thumb to the card and whispered something in Zulu. The ink shimmered, then vanished, revealing a line of text in English. The page ended, affixed red letters of text. "Truth is light when shared among the rooted." Amaury looked up. That was her way of reminding us we were never meant to stand alone. He opened a drawer and pulled out a faded envelope. Inside was a Polaroid photo of him as a boy sitting in Lucia's lap, surrounded by books. She was reading to him, just like in the memories Keanu had seen in the crystalline chamber. "Said she was a Durban when I was 8, Amaury said. Said she was a teacher doing an exchange program. But she stayed for 6 months. I never forgot her." Keanu leaned forward. "Do you still have the necklace?" Amaury blinked. "You mean her necklace?" "She left it to me," Keanu said. "It activates the chamber." Amaury paused. Then she was serious. Isabel spoke softly. "She believed each of you carried a piece of the code, the technology, the empathy, the cultural threads. Together, they formed something more than any of you could do alone." Amaury slowly nodded. "Then it's time." That evening, Amaury joined Keanu and Isabel in a quiet tea house on the edge of Stanley Park. The glow of lanterns reflected in the window beside them. Rain trickled outside, tapping on the roof like a familiar rhythm. It reminded Keanu of the night the lawyer first called. Amaury opened a secured tablet and brought up a private network. A list of names Lucia had quietly connected through encrypted servers and satellite messages. Some of the names matched the ones in Keanu's folder. Others were new. Dozens of dots scattered across the globe, each with a unique marker. "She called it the root grid," Amaury said. It's not just a network, it's a map of alignment. Who's ready? Who's waiting? Who's afraid? Keanu stared at the screen. Every dot was a person, a story, a possibility. Lucia hadn't just believed in potential. She had invested in it, protected it, nurtured it across decades, across languages, borders, and belief systems. Amari looked up. "You're going to reach them, aren't you?" Keanu hesitated, then nodded. One by one, he tapped the next name on the list. Dr. Hane Watanabe. Nagano, Japan. Educator of wonder. And it was pretty much that had Amari smiled. She created a language-free learning system for children in trauma zones. Lucia funded her refugee school after the Syrian quake. Next, Luis Moreno, Santiago, Chile, the witness. A journalist who gave up his platform after a series of unjust exposés cost lives. Lucia sent him a camera without instructions. 2 years later, he started a silent documentary series. No narration, just people telling their own stories. Another, Anika de Silva, Mumbai, healer. A physician working in urban slums using plant-based remedies Lucia cataloged decades ago. She once wrote, "Surgery is power, but presence is medicine." The list continued, each story woven to the next like an unseen tapestry. Keanu felt the pulse of it now. Not pressure, not burden, but calling. Isabel watched him closely. "You were never meant to lead them with orders," she said. "You're meant to remind them why they began." Keanu folded the list gently and tucked it into his jacket. Then he looked at Amari. "Ewan?" Amari didn't hesitate. "Always." They stood, the three of them, in the quiet light of a forgotten city night. No cameras, no headlines, just purpose. Outside, the wind had picked up, but for the first time in days, Keanu didn't feel cold. He felt guided. He felt chosen. And as they stepped into the darkness, heading toward the next flight, the bracelet on his wrist glowed, just a little brighter. The wind howled across the vast snowy fields of northern Canada, where a single road twisted through a forest of pine and birch. At the end of that road sat a secluded timber lodge, wide and low, its windows glowing faintly against the cold. It had once been Lucia's retreat, unknown even to most of her family. Now it served a new purpose. Keanu stood at the edge of the wraparound porch as the first members of the constellation began to arrive. Isabel was already inside, preparing the main room, her hands moving with quiet determination. One by one, the others emerged from rented trucks, snow-covered sedans, and dark-weathered jeeps. They came from every corner of the world, drawn not by obligation, but by the same quiet voice that had once guided them from the shadows. Amari was the first to greet Keanu with a nod, followed by Hane Watanabe, a soft-spoken educator from Japan whose eyes shimmered with wisdom and sadness. Then came Luis Moreno, the silent documentarian from Chile. Anika de Silva, the healer from India, entered last, a deep scarf wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the room as if she were reading the energy before she spoke. They gathered around a long oak table in the main lodge room, where a fire cracked gently in the hearth. The walls were lined with maps, photos, and Lucia's scribbled notes. Every surface told a story, but it wasn't until Keanu placed Lucia's necklace in the center of the table that the energy shifted. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch. Lucia had always done that, waiting for people to find their own way into a moment. Finally, Keanu looked around the table. "You've all felt it," he said. "That something is coming. That this world isn't just struggling, it's fraying." Louise nodded first. Lucia called it the quiet collapse, not an explosion, a soft unraveling. "Tree told me," Hane added, "that the most dangerous silence is the one we stop hearing." Amari leaned forward. "She didn't just prepare us, She wired us together. Every one of us has something the others need. They began sharing pieces of their stories. Annika spoke about the time Lucia showed up unannounced at her mobile clinic in Mumbai. She didn't introduce herself. She just started helping, cleaning bandages, holding hands, making tea for the families waiting in line. It was weeks before I realized who she was. Louis remembered how Lucia once sent him a reel of film and a simple note: "Tell their truth, not yours." Hane recalled a memory from the aftermath of the 2011 earthquake in Japan. "I lost my students," she said quietly. "Not all of them, but enough. I was going to quit. Lucia sent me a letter with only one sentence: 'Even broken songs still carry melody.' That saved me." Keanu looked around the room. They weren't strangers. They were fragments of a greater design. As the fire burned lower, the group leaned closer, not from cold, but from gravity. A sense of weight hung over the room, not fear, but realization. They were no longer individuals, inspired by a wise benefactor. They were a unit, unfinished, but bound by purpose. Isabel unrolled a large cloth map Lucia had stitched by hand. It wasn't a geographical map. It showed no borders, no cities. Instead, it bore a network of symbols, roots connecting nodes, circles branching into spirals, each linked by glowing threads of golden ink that shimmered only under firelight. "This is the legacy map," Isabel said softly. "Lucia called it her human backup system." Mari raised an eyebrow. "Backup to what?" "To civilization," Isabel answered. "To conscience." She traced a line between nodes. Lucia didn't think governments would collapse. She thought values would. That systems would keep running even when the soul had gone missing. Her plan wasn't to replace technology. It was to replace isolation. She believed if everything else failed, there needed to be a circle ready to heal what was left. Keanu absorbed every word. It made sense now. The secrecy, the training, the way Lucia never acted like a savior, but always like a gardener, planting, nurturing, disappearing before the bloom. Miyaka gently placed her hand over the tree emblem on the map. "We're not here to lead the world," she said. "We're here to hold it steady." Louis stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow had begun falling again, soft and silent. He spoke without turning. "And who holds us?" The room was still, until Keanu spoke. "She does, still." They turned to him. "I don't want to lead this," he said. "Not as a title, not with authority. But I'll stand at the center if you'll keep the circle alive." Hane bowed slightly. "That's all we need." The others nodded, one by one. Utia's circle, not a hierarchy, a constellation, each point shining because it was seen, not ranked. Before the night ended, they voted to keep the lodge as their first safe house. They'd build others, small sanctuaries in forgotten corners of the world, not to hide, but to be ready. Marie called it the Reserve, a place of last resort, but also first hope. Before bed, Isabel placed the glowing pendant into a carved slot in the fireplace mantel. A mechanism clicked. The fire flared blue for a moment, revealing an inscription on the hearthstone. It read, "When the world forgets itself, remember each other." And in that moment, none of them felt alone. Not anymore. The next morning, the snow had stopped falling. A soft silence blanketed the landscape around the lodge, broken only by the sound of Isabel walking into the study with something wrapped in silk. The others gathered slowly, drawn by instinct more than words. Keanu looked up from his notes as Isabel placed the bundle on the table and slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a thick book, aged but preserved. On its leather cover was the silver tree symbol, the one Lucia wore around her neck, the one now etched into Keanu's memory. But this version was older, much older. Its lines were imperfect, as if chiseled by hand in a time before recorded history. "This," Isabel said, "is where it began, or at least where we know it did." She turned the pages carefully, revealing sketches, journal entries, and photographic prints, images of ancient ruins from different parts of the world. Egyptian pillars, Mayan temple carvings, stone relics from Southeast Asia. All bore variations of the same tree. Sometimes the roots were more pronounced, sometimes the branches stretched beyond the stone itself. But the symbol remained. The trunk, the flow, the mirrored halves. Lucia spent most of her life tracing this symbol, Isabel continued. She believed it was more than a family crest, more than a cultural artifact. She thought it was a map. Keanu leaned closer. "A map to what?" "To people," Isabel said. "To a kind of consciousness, an inheritance, not just genetic, something older." She pointed to one sketch, a cave wall discovered in Namibia. The tree had been etched beside stars, positioned in a pattern that mirrored a now extinct constellation. "Every time this symbol showed up," Isabel said, "so did disappearances. Researchers, linguists, journalists, anyone who got too close." "Disappearances?" Luis asked, narrowing his eyes. "Some were explained," she said. "Plane crashes, accidents, but some just vanished. No trace, not even digital." Keanu flipped to another page. This one showed DNA strands. Handwritten notes from Lucia surrounded the double helix. "She found something in her own blood," Isabel explained. "Extra markers, sequences with no known match to human ancestry. She ran it 3 times to be sure, even sent it to a lab in Geneva under an alias. Same result." Annika looked uneasy. "You're saying Lucia wasn't fully human?" Isabel shook her head. "Not quite. She believed she was human, but descended from a group that had contact, or maybe origin, somewhere else. She called them the first gardeners." The group went quiet. The fire crackled in the hearth. The air felt thinner. Isabel turned another page and revealed a photograph of Lucia holding Keanu as a baby. Around his wrist, barely visible, was a cloth bracelet with the same tree symbol. "He knew before you ever spoke," Isabel said. "You weren't just someone she loved. You were part of this. She believed you were a bridge between the old keepers and the new ones." Keanu sat back, the weight of it all pressing into him. He had always wondered why Lucia never fully fit in with the other adults. Why she seemed to know things before they happened. Why she looked at him like she saw something more than just a boy. Luis studied the map again, his fingers grazing one of the oldest symbols drawn beside a Southeast Asian carving. "I've filmed those ruins," he murmured. "Cambodia. The stone was almost magnetic. Our cameras glitched near it, but only when that symbol was in the frame." Ameri spoke next, his voice low. "In one of Lucia's messages, she talked about the memory beneath the soil. I thought it was poetic. Now I'm not sure." Keanu looked back at the pendant Lucia had left behind, the silver tree with the strange grooves in its roots. He remembered how often she had clutched it, especially when watching the news or holding him when he cried as a child. It had never seemed like a simple keepsake. Now, it felt like an anchor. Isabel opened a small wooden box she had been carrying. Inside were strips of fabric, all bearing the same symbol, embroidered with gold thread. She handed one to each person. "These were meant for when the circle was ready," she said, "not as identification, but as remembrance of who we are, where we came from, and what we carry." Annika held hers gently, her fingers brushing the thread. "We were never meant to control the world," she said, "only to keep it from forgetting itself." Isabel nodded. "That's what the symbol means. It's not power, it's memory, legacy, balance." Keanu turned his fabric over in his hands. He thought of his own legacy, his roles, his fame, His years of pain and quiet healing, none of it had ever made full sense to him. Until now. Lucia hadn't just watched over him. She had believed in something before he ever took a step. He rose from his seat and approached the fireplace, holding the embroidered cloth. The flames reflected in his eyes as he spoke. This symbol isn't ours to explain. It's ours to protect. Even if we don't understand everything, we know this. Lucia left us a path, not just to survive something, but to remember how to live through it. Silence fell over the room again, but this time it felt like agreement. Lucia had prepared them for more than a reunion. She had built a system of conscience in a world rushing toward noise, confusion, and disconnection, and now they were its living roots. They were the memory of a tree planted long before they were born, and the branches of whatever came next. The stillness inside the Canadian lodge didn't last long. 2 days after the circle's formation, Luis noticed something off. While scanning the secure satellite feed they'd been using to review Lucia's encrypted archives, he saw a new data stream, unfamiliar, embedded with strange pings repeating every 11 seconds. A foreign signal was bouncing between their communications. It hadn't come from Lucia's systems. He called Keanu and Isabel into the study. The mood shifted instantly when Luis pulled up the feed on the wide monitor. "Someone's been watching," he said. "Not just recently, for years. Maybe decades?" Keanu leaned in. "How many systems?" "All of them," Luis replied. "My documentary films, Amari's research labs, Anika's education platform, even the satellite in orbit I helped launch last year. It had embedded code that didn't belong. Lucia's network masked most of it, but after her death, the masking collapsed." Amari's hands clenched. "So they know we've gathered." Isabel nodded grimly. "They've probably known for days." That night, while most of the circle was asleep, Keanu stood alone outside the lodge, staring into the snowy woods. A low hum in the distance prickled his nerves. It wasn't natural. It wasn't wind. Something was coming. By dawn, they had their answer. An urgent call came in from one of Lucia's old safe house lines in Prague. Someone had broken into the satellite backup center Amari used for clean energy patents. Hours later, Anika's encrypted teaching servers in Kenya were wiped clean. The attacks were strategic, precise, and fast. Then it got personal. Leah, a young humanitarian from Marseille who had joined the circle just days ago, was followed while leaving a train station in Belgium. She was pushed onto the tracks by a man who fled before security could reach him. She survived, but barely. That same night, Jiro, a medical researcher from Kyoto, vanished without a trace on his way home. The circle was under attack. Luis traced the signals again, deeper this time. They all routed through a shadow network of servers based in multiple countries. The name that kept resurfacing in old metadata and hidden contracts was chilling. Orion Fold. A name Lucia had mentioned once in her hidden recordings, a name none of them had taken seriously, until now. Keanu stared at the screen where Luis had displayed the group's internal diagram. Each member, each contact, each location they had visited since Lucia's death. All highlighted, all logged. "Who were they?" Keanu asked. Isabel answered first. "Lucia said they were real, that they'd been preparing for decades. A consortium of global influencers, tech moguls, political dynasties, energy barons, all working to centralize power through what she called a synthetic takeover." Luis added, "Not robots. Worse. AI-controlled proxies. They want to replace human leadership with controllable replicas. Not androids, but human vessels, guided by artificial intelligence. Lucia called it emotional sterilization. And she said it would start slow," Isabel murmured. "With governments collapsing from within, leadership becoming distant, apathetic, people choosing efficiency over empathy." Keanu stood silent for a moment, then spoke. She always said the future wasn't about machines. It was about memory, about who we let ourselves forget. He turned to the others. We can't stay here. If they found two of us, they'll find all of us. We need to disappear. Isabel's eyes flickered. There is one place. Isabel walked to the lodge's fireplace and retrieved a leather case Lucia had once locked away. Inside was a weathered map, hand-drawn with coordinates marked in Lucia's delicate cursive. At the center of the page was a name, San Estrella, a monastery in the Andes, she explained. Lucia said it was one of her oldest vaults. Long before she was your nanny, she built safe houses beneath sacred sites around the world. This one is under an abandoned monastery in northern Chile. Keanu scanned the map. The altitude was high, the terrain brutal, and the journey nearly impossible without preparation. She said it held the last phase of her plan, Isabel continued. Technology she didn't trust anyone else to see, not even me. Amari looked up. So why tell us now? Because, Isabel said softly. Lucia knew there would be a moment when they'd come for us. Not for our inventions or ideas, but for our ability to inspire. Luis closed his laptop. We're no longer just children, she guided, we're targets. That evening, they split into small teams. The circle members scattered with forged IDs, burner phones, and encrypted maps embedded in analog code. Isabel and Keanu would lead the journey to Chile. The others would regroup in secure intervals, each responsible for preserving a portion of Lucia's legacy until they could reconnect. Before leaving, Keanu sat alone in the lodge's study, staring at Lucia's old pendant. The silver tree shimmered under the lamplight, catching a strange glow he hadn't noticed before. He remembered her voice telling him bedtime stories, how she always said, "One day, kindness will be dangerous, but you must choose it anyway." Outside, the snow had stopped. The moonlight spilled across the clearing as Isabel approached him with their gear. They'll be watching every known airport, satellite, and digital channel, she said. Keanu rose. Then we'll take a route they never mapped. As they disappeared into the frozen darkness, the circle began to fracture, only to one day reform again, not just to survive the coming storm, but to bring memory, compassion, and truth back to a world that had nearly forgotten what they looked like. The Andes loomed like ancient gods carved in stone, their peaks covered in snow and silence. The journey had taken days, through mountain passes, rugged trails, and winding paths barely visible on any map. Keanu, Isabel, Amaury, Luis, and a young cryptologist named Mira finally reached the hidden monastery nestled into the cliffs, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The building looked forgotten by time. Vines clung to crumbling stone, wooden beams hung broken across arched doorways. Wind whispered through shattered stained glass. But when Keanu placed Lucia's pendant into a carved indentation on the monastery's massive front doors, the stone shifted. A mechanical hum began to rise from the earth. The doors slowly opened. Inside, the air was dry and heavy, as if holding its breath for decades. Candles lining the walls sparked to life automatically, revealing a vast hallway descending deep underground. The team descended in silence, unsure of what waited below. At the bottom, they found it. A vaulted chamber stretched before them, half shrine, half laboratory. One side held relics from across civilizations, Mayan glyphs, Egyptian scrolls, ancient Sanskrit carvings, and fragments of machines that looked millennia old. The other side was pristine, sleek consoles, energy panels, and devices that blinked with a soft, otherworldly light. Luis walked toward a display table and let out a low breath. This isn't just a safe house. It's a fusion of past and future. Mira approached a crystalline pod resting on a pedestal in the center of the room. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. An inscription at the base read, Lucia Alvarez, age 21. Isabel stared in disbelief. She was here, before all of us? Keanu gently touched the pod. It glowed brighter, and a soft projection shimmered into the air. Lucia appeared, not as the elderly woman Keanu remembered, but young, sharp-eyed, and confident. Her voice filled the chamber. If you've found this, then the world is nearing collapse. I don't mean nuclear war. I mean the unraveling of soul, of what it means to be human. She paused, then continued, You were never supposed to know this part of my story. I was once part of them. Orion Fold. I was recruited when I was 17. They believed in progress, control, and evolution beyond human emotion. I believed them. For a while, the image shifted to a scene of her standing in a suit beside unknown figures, faces blurred, backlit in shadows. Damie told me emotion was a virus, that leadership should be logical, data-driven, machine-refined. They showed me how easily people would trade love for certainty. But then I met someone, a child. Her name was Mila. She laughed, even in chaos. She died in my arms during one of Orion Fold's cleanses. That moment broke me. Lucia's eyes in the projection shimmered with tears. I fled. I took knowledge, resources, and secrets they never meant to be shared. I ran for decades. I changed my name. I became a nanny, because no one looks twice at the help. But it gave me access. It gave me you. She looked directly into the projection's lens, straight into Keanu's eyes. I knew the world would need people raised on something other than fear and ambition. That's why I chose you. That's why I chose them. The projection faded for a second, then returned with one final message. But if you're watching this, then they know. Orion Fold has seen you. They'll stop at nothing now, not because you're dangerous with weapons, but because you remember how to feel. They fear empathy more than any army. Protect it. The room fell into silence. No one moved. Even the faint hum of the machines seemed to pause. Keanu turned to Isabel, his face unreadable. She defected. She was one of them. Isabel nodded slowly. And she gave it all up to protect us. Mira stepped toward a series of metal drawers beneath the pod and opened one. Inside were thick, encoded volumes sealed with biometric locks. Another held drives etched with strange markings. Amari scanned the labels. These looked like backup schematics, gene archives, maybe even energy grids. Louise examined a nearby table filled with hand-drawn diagrams. This one outlines education systems built on emotional intelligence. Another shows conflict resolution protocols. It's like she was designing an entirely different kind of civilization. Keanu walked through the chamber, touching the artifacts as if retracing Lucia's steps. The journey wasn't just about discovering secrets. It was about stepping into the role Lucia had long prepared for him, though he never knew it. She didn't want to rule, he said quietly. She wanted to guide. They found one last message, sealed in a compartment beneath the floor. A thin black card activated a circular projection. Lucia reappeared, older now, closer to the woman Keanu remembered. Keanu, she said softly, if you've made it this far, it means you've begun to awaken. But the others may still be afraid. Some will want to hide. Others will want to fight. Your role is not to lead with power. Your gift is connection. Remind them what's worth saving. Her voice lowered. And don't be surprised when they come for you. Orion Fold doesn't forgive. But they underestimate you. They always have. The message ended with one word, echoed in the darkness. Remember. That night, the team slept in silence beneath the stone ceiling, surrounded by generations of forgotten knowledge. No one spoke of fear, but it lingered in the shadows. At dawn, Keanu stepped outside. The rising sun bathed the peaks in gold. He looked over the edge of the cliff, wind pressing against his coat, pendant glinting at his chest. He felt it now, not just responsibility, but understanding. Lucia had built something far bigger than he imagined. A resistance of the spirit, a living memory encoded not in war, but in wisdom. Behind him, Isabel stepped beside him. What now? Keanu's answer was simple. We keep going. Far below, a figure stood at the mountain's base, watching through binoculars. Orion Fold had found them, but they were already too late. The children of compassion had begun to rise. 2 days after the discovery at the monastery, Keanu and the others descended the mountains by night. The path was narrow, the winds brutal, but their spirits were steady. Each of them carried a piece of Lucia's legacy: documents, drives, artifacts, safeguarded in sealed compartments within their packs. Their goal was simple: reach a safe house in Valparaiso, then disappear into separate locations until the next phase. But somewhere near the halfway point, just outside a desolate village, the road narrowed into a ravine. A sleek, unmarked SUV was parked across the path, its headlights off. Keanu raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. Before anyone could speak, a flashbang detonated behind them. The hillside erupted with masked figures in black tactical gear, weapons drawn, moving fast and without sound. They didn't shout orders. They didn't identify themselves. But Keanu knew instantly who they were. Orion Fold had found them again. 2 men lunged toward Keanu, tasers crackling. Isabel pushed him down and slammed a small copper disc into the ground. The device lit up, sending out a pulse that cracked the attackers' visors and sent them staggering back. Amari, crouched behind a fallen boulder, opened a case Lucia had given him. Inside was a black orb with swirling light inside. "This better work," he muttered, tossing it toward the center of the ambush. The orb hovered mid-air for a second, then released a sonic wave that shattered glass, fried communications, and knocked the attackers flat against the walls of the ravine. Their weapons sparked. One drone fell from the sky, crashing into the trees with a burst of flame. The silence afterward was eerie. Keanu stood slowly, scanning the dazed figures. "Get their drives," Isabel ordered, already at one of the fallen soldiers. "We need to know what they were tracking." Luis helped drag one of the attackers toward a shallow ditch. "No insignia, no ID, just like Lucia said." Amari retrieved the SUV's onboard system and yanked its data chip. "Encrypted, but we've seen this signature before. It's Orion Fold, all right." They moved quickly, covering their trail, gathering what they could. What they didn't know was that 2 hidden cameras embedded in the surrounding trees had captured everything. And by morning, those images would reach the inbox of a freelance journalist in Santiago. Within hours, they'd be in the hands of a global media outlet. By the time Keanu and the others reached Valparaiso, news anchors around the world were replaying the footage in slow motion. Unidentified operatives attacking a celebrity in a Chilean mountain pass. Drones crashing mid-air. Mysterious tech lighting up the terrain. And Keanu Reeves shielding others instead of running. Headlines swirled with conspiracy. Was it a failed military kidnapping? A new film shoot gone wrong? Or something deeper, stranger? Keanu knew the questions would only grow louder, so he made a decision. The next evening, without fanfare, he stood behind a single podium in a quiet garden outside the safe house. No major networks, just one camera, one live stream. His hands rested lightly on the edge of the podium as he took a breath. "Most of you know me from movies," he began, "but this isn't a performance." He paused. No teleprompter, no script. What happened in the Andes wasn't a random attack. It was a warning. There are forces in this world that thrive on silence and fear. Lucia Alvarez, a woman most of you never heard of, was not only my nanny, she was a guardian of something humanity forgot. He looked up, voice steady. "And I'm not here to lead a revolution. I'm here to remind you that the world doesn't need more control. It needs more care. And that's what we're here to offer." The live stream was short, just under 6 minutes, but it echoed louder than most political speeches delivered in a decade. Within hours, hashtags like Lucia Circle, the Keanu broadcast, and Care Not Control began trending in nearly every major country. Reddit threads dissected every word, YouTube flooded with analysis videos, and major news outlets struggled to get official statements from Keanu's team, but he wasn't available for interviews. Not yet. Behind closed doors, Isabel stared at the flood of comments scrolling across her tablet. "They weren't ready," she whispered, "but they heard it anyway." Amari looked over from a worn desk where he was decoding the attacker's hardware. "You think we made the right move?" Keanu nodded slowly. "The world's been sleepwalking. Sometimes it takes a quiet truth to wake people up." What none of them realized, however, was that the silence from Orion Fold wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. Deep inside an underground facility in Geneva, a group of high-level operatives reviewed the video, frame by frame. The face recognition scans confirmed what they feared. Not just Keanu's presence, but Isabel's, Amari's, Luis. The group was no longer shadows on their radar. They were public figures now, influencers of a new kind. That meant two things. First, the Fold could no longer eliminate them without scrutiny. Second, the Fold would have to destroy their credibility instead. Within 3 days, tabloid headlines appeared accusing Keanu of fabricating the entire event for a publicity stunt. A few supposed eyewitnesses were interviewed, none of whom had been present. A photo of a prop weapon left behind on set began circulating, supposedly proving it had all been staged for a viral film campaign. But the public wasn't buying it. Comment sections flooded with defense. "I don't care what the tabloids say, I saw something in his eyes. He was telling the truth. Hal doesn't need a publicity stunt, he's Keanu." Others began recounting strange, similar events in their own towns. Sightings of strange symbols, tech malfunctions near ruins, whispers about ancient glyphs. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for people to start asking questions, and once curiosity is sparked, it's hard to snuff out. Meanwhile, inside the safe house, Lucia's circle gathered around an old world map. Isabel placed pins into the locations of those they had already found. 8 in total, 5 more still unaccounted for. One pin hovered above eastern Turkey, undecided. "I think this one might be a trap," Luis said, narrowing his eyes. "It's always a trap," Keanu replied, "but we're going anyway." From a hidden drawer in Lucia's encrypted vault, Amari pulled out a device unlike the others. This one glowed with a soft, pale blue light and pulsed like a heartbeat. "I think this is what they were really after," he whispered. Keanu took it gently. "Then it's time we learn why." As the others prepared supplies and reviewed escape routes, Keanu stepped outside. The air was cold, but the sky was clear. He looked up, not for answers, but for resolve. Lucia had once said, "The heart is the last map when the stars go dark." He finally understood what she meant. They were being hunted now, but they weren't running. They were walking into the storm, together. Project Echo began with no fanfare, no press conference, and no logo. It started as a file upload, a living document, open source and anonymous, shared to a quiet corner of the internet. Within it were detailed instructions on how to build sustainable water filtration systems using discarded materials, blueprints for modular classrooms powered entirely by solar and geothermal energy, and psychological frameworks for community-based trauma healing. Every page ended with the same signature, a single tree symbol etched in silver. People didn't trust it at first, but one brave group in Sudan tested the water system. Within 2 weeks, a village of 400 had clean, reliable drinking water. A group in Ukraine built a classroom, following the blueprint. Children returned to school without the buzz of screens or the influence of algorithms. Instead, they read, painted, planted gardens, and talked. The momentum spread faster than any of them expected. Within a month, volunteers from dozens of countries joined the movement, adapting the systems to their local needs. Engineers in South Korea modified the tech for urban rooftops. Healers in Colombia merged Lucia's trauma practices with indigenous rituals. A Maasai village in Kenya built a circle-shaped school and painted the tree symbol across the exterior. Keanu watched it unfold not with pride, but awe. They hadn't forced a message. They hadn't begged for attention. They had offered care, quietly and without ego, and the world had responded. Journalists who had once written off Lucia's circle as a myth or hoax began to investigate. What they found were real people doing real work with no financial backing and no publicity machine. One article called it the most organized act of decentralized compassion in modern history. And yet, not a single name was attached. That was by design. Lucia had warned them, the moment you become the face, you become the target. Be the roots instead. Let others grow. But some recognition couldn't be avoided, especially not when schools in Beirut, refugee camps in Myanmar, and flood zones in Bangladesh were all showing the same silver tree painted on their walls. It was no longer a mystery. It was a movement. People began carving the tree into stone, tattooing it onto their skin, planting real saplings in its shape. Influencers tried to latch on, but the circle made it clear this wasn't a brand. It wasn't for sale. It was a seed. And then the invitation came. It arrived in a plain white envelope, hand-delivered by a UN liaison to Keanu's doorstep. Inside was a simple note. The world is listening. Will you speak? Isabel stood behind him as he read it. She didn't say a word at first. Then, quietly, she whispered, "That was Lucia's last dream, that one of her children would speak truth into the silence." Keanu looked at her. "But I'm not a politician." "Exactly," she said. "That's why they'll listen." He stared at the note a moment longer, then nodded. They would go to New York, not as saviors, not as rebels, but as witnesses to what love, quietly planted, could grow into when the world was ready to listen. The United Nations Assembly Hall was unlike anywhere Keanu had ever stood. He had walked on countless stages, faced crowds of every kind, but this was different. This place wasn't about performance. It was about history, policy, consequence. He waited backstage, the silver tree pendant tucked into his palm. It wasn't for show. It was for grounding. The delegates shuffled in slowly. Some whispered. A few recognized him, but none expected what he was about to say. Cameras were in place. Security lined the walls. And still, the room somehow felt quiet. Then Keanu walked to the podium. He didn't carry notes, he didn't read from a screen. He just looked out at the sea of faces and paused, letting the silence settle. He remembered Lucia's voice in the chamber of echoes. "Speak like you're planting something." And so he did. He spoke of a boy raised by a woman who never asked for recognition, who believed in the power of gentleness as much as genius. He spoke of people around the world who chose healing over headlines, who rebuilt lives with their hands and their hearts. He never mentioned Orienfold. He never pointed fingers. He spoke only of what was possible when people chose care over control. Then he reached into his pocket and lifted the silver pendant. "This," he said, "was my Nanny's necklace. She told me the tree meant something ancient, that the roots are our values and the branches are our actions. The trunk, the core, is our responsibility to each other." He looked around the room. Some were still. Some blinked hard, trying not to cry. There are people in this world who want to replace the roots with wires, who want to cut off the branches that don't bear profit. But what if we measured progress not by growth, but by connection? The audience sat in silence. You don't have to join us. You don't even have to believe us. Just ask yourselves, in the quiet moments, what kind of world are you helping grow? Then he stepped down. He left the pendant on the podium. And as he exited the chamber, reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and the online world exploded. But Keanu didn't stop for interviews. He walked straight into the arms of Isabel, who was waiting just beyond the marble corridor, her eyes filled with tears and pride. Across the globe, the speech was shared and replayed millions of times, not because it was viral, but because it was real. In refugee camps and hospitals, in classrooms and homes, people gathered and listened. They didn't hear a celebrity. They heard someone who had walked through the fire and emerged carrying seeds, and they began planting them. From that day forward, the tree symbol was no longer just Lucia's. It belonged to everyone who chose care over fear, compassion over control. And quietly, the world began to shift. The chamber was silent as Keanu stepped onto the stage again. The earlier speech had planted a seed. Now came the deeper truth, the kind that didn't shout, but stayed with you. He stood behind the podium with his hands resting gently on either side, the tree symbol faintly reflecting in the polished surface. He began, not with a declaration, but with a story. "When I was 8 years old," Keanu said, his voice steady, "my nanny used to braid my hair in the kitchen while humming an old lullaby. I never knew the words, just the melody. Years later, I asked her what it meant. She said, 'It means we carry the world in our arms, one child at a time.'" The room didn't shift, it leaned in. "She wasn't just a nanny," he continued. "Her name was Lucia Alvarez, and she raised me, not only with tenderness, but with vision. What I didn't know then was that she was raising many others. Quietly, gently, across continents, across languages. She found children who had nothing and gave them everything they needed, not money, not power, but belief. That they mattered, that they could shape the world." He paused, letting the weight settle. He never held a title, never gave an interview, never took credit, but everything good I've ever done, everything compassionate I've ever chosen, came from her. Somewhere in the back, a diplomat set down his pen. Another nodded. "I stand here today because one woman believed the future wasn't something to build, but someone to raise." He let that hang. There are those among us who think power comes from control, from surveillance, from domination, but the greatest power I've ever seen came from quiet care. From the way Lucia folded laundry while listening to a crying child. From the way she never shouted, but always heard. He told them about Lucia's tree, about the projects now blooming under her teachings. He did not mention Orient Fold, not by name, but he described the shadow that had grown alongside the world, the obsession with artificial certainty, with perfect control systems, with predictive governance that stripped away mystery and mercy. He spoke of humanity as a garden, not an equation. "Lucia once told me," he said softly, "when you forget what it means to be human, look into the eyes of someone who's been hurt and stayed kind." That's the future she believed in. He could feel the shift now, heads nodding, eyes blinking back quiet emotion, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. "She taught me that when the world breaks," he said, "it won't be the strongest who rebuild it. It will be the ones who know how to care." Then, after a long pause, he lifted a small slip of paper from his jacket, a note written in Lucia's hand. "She wrote this before she passed," Keanu said. "She left it inside an old music box." He read it aloud. "The future is not what we build, but who we raise." The room held its breath. There was a stillness that followed the final line, deeper than applause. Delegates who had heard thousands of speeches sat unmoving, not because they were stunned by grandeur, but because something quiet inside them had been stirred. For a few seconds, even the translators in their booths paused, unsure if words in any language could carry what had just been felt. Keanu stepped back from the microphone. He didn't bow, didn't wave. He just stood there, and the room, so often filled with calculation and debate, held a reverent hush. Then slowly, one by one, some of the youngest delegates rose to their feet, not out of protocol, but out of recognition. No music cued them, no leader signaled them. It was spontaneous, the kind of silence that grows into gratitude without needing a word. Then came the applause, not thunderous, but warm, a resonance of hearts cracking open, of people remembering something they hadn't felt in years, hope without spectacle. Afterward, Keanu exited through the back halls of the UN headquarters. No press corps followed. Isabel met him in a quiet corridor near a small garden most diplomats passed without noticing. She had been watching on a screen from a remote room. When he appeared, she smiled. Not wide, but deep. "You did it," she said softly. Keanu shook his head. She did. They walked through the garden path. Neither said much. In a corner, under a cherry tree not yet in bloom, Isabel reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. Inside was a small seed, the same kind Lucia had once used to teach the children about patience. "He said to plant it when your voice became louder than your fear," Isabel whispered. Keanu knelt and dug a small hole in the dirt. He placed the seed in the earth and covered it gently. Around them, city noise hummed. Helicopters in the sky, cars on the street. But for that moment, it was just soil and breath. The next day, major networks around the globe played clips of the speech. Some tried to politicize it, others labeled it spiritual, but most couldn't classify it. They called it something else entirely, a reckoning in stillness. Commentators debated who Lucia Alvarez really was. Theories ran wild. Some accused Keanu of creating mythology, but others dug deeper, finding traces of her influence in obscure charities, forgotten patents, and scattered academic programs around the world. The tree symbol, already spreading, became a new kind of emblem, not of protest or marketing, but of presence. People wore it as a reminder, not to dominate, but to nurture. Meanwhile, Orion Fold remained silent. They did not attack. They did not discredit. Perhaps they understood what Keanu's speech had really done. It had shifted something too subtle to fight. He hadn't called for revolution. He had simply reminded the world what it was supposed to be. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The next morning, a single flower bloomed on the tree above where the seed had been planted. Spring had come. Keanu returned to Lucia's house alone. The sun was beginning to set over the quiet neighborhood, casting long shadows across the front porch. The wind stirred the trees gently, like a breath exhaled from the earth itself. The home looked exactly as he'd left it, as if it had been waiting patiently for him. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with quiet reverence. The hallway still smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. He passed by the staircase, running his fingers along the railing, remembering the tiny hand that used to grip it. His hand, years ago. When Lucia would guide him down in the mornings, humming softly, the day still young. He made his way to the study, where so much had changed, and yet so much had stayed the same. The shelves still held the same books. The velvet box still sat on the desk, waiting. He reached for it gently and opened it. Inside was the necklace, the silver tree, the symbol that had come to define something so much larger than any one person. Its branches still gleamed with that familiar sheen, but this time, they reflected more than light. They reflected legacy. He lifted the necklace and held it in his palm for a long moment, then placed it gently back into the box. As he closed the lid, a soft blue glow shimmered from beneath the desk. A small projection activated automatically, rising into the air, flickering for a second before stabilizing into Lucia's face. She was younger in the image, maybe in her 60s, but her voice held the same strength, the same unwavering kindness. "If you're seeing this," she began, "I knew you would find your way." Keanu didn't blink. "I never needed to be remembered," she continued. "I just needed you to remember who you are. Not what the world said you were, not what your name became, but what you were born with. That heart of yours. It's always been the map. She smiled, a little wistfully. You were the wild one, the one who couldn't stop asking why, who couldn't stop caring. And the world tried to convince you that was weakness. But you held on, and I watched you grow into the kind of man this world desperately needs. Her image shimmered slightly. I loved you like a son, Keanu. And if I could have had 100 more years, I would have used every one of them to protect the boy I saw standing in the doorway, holding a toy airplane and asking if the sky had an end. He closed his eyes. I'm gone now, but the world isn't empty. It's full. It's full of all the people you'll never meet, whose lives you've already touched. It's full of echoes, of seeds you didn't even know you planted. So if you're wondering what to do next, just keep planting. The projection dimmed. And remember, she added, just before it faded completely, you were never alone. The room fell silent. No more lights, no more messages. Just the ticking of a small clock on the far wall and the faint rustle of leaves outside the window. Keanu stood there for a long time. He then closed the box, slid it into a drawer, and locked it. Not to hide it away, but to preserve it, to let it rest. Outside, Isabel was waiting on the porch. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her face turned slightly toward the fading sun. Keanu stepped out and joined her. He didn't speak at first. Then, after a while, he said quietly, "She's not gone." Isabel turned to him, her eyes soft. "He's in all of us." They both looked toward the horizon. The tree in the front yard rustled gently. A few petals fluttered down like small blessings returning to the soil. That night, Keanu walked through the house one last time. He paused at the photos on the mantel, faded images of Lucia with strangers, friends, and children. Some he recognized now as members of the circle. Others were mysteries. But in each photo, she wore that same expression. Not pride, not performance. Peace. In the kitchen, a kettle sat on the stove. A cracked mug rested beside it, the one she used every morning. He turned it over in his hands, then gently placed it back. It wasn't sadness he felt. It was something else, a stillness that felt sacred. In the garden out back, small solar lights lined the path she'd once walked barefoot in the early mornings. He followed the trail with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the wind move through the flowers. The air smelled like rosemary, sage, and something faintly sweet. He knelt by the tree in the center of the garden. Its bark had grown thick, the roots deep. At its base, a small stone plaque had been added by Isabel. It read, "She gave light where others offered shadow. She left no monument, only miracles." Keanu rested his hand on the stone, his fingers tracing the carved letters slowly. No one would ever know the full truth. Not about Lucia, not about what they had discovered. And that was exactly how it was meant to be. Some truths weren't meant to be shouted. Some were meant to be lived. The next morning, Keanu left the house at sunrise. Isabel walked beside him to the edge of the property. They didn't say goodbye. There was no need. They had work to do, but now they understood the rhythm of it. Nothing would be rushed, nothing forced. Before stepping into the waiting vehicle, Keanu looked back at the home once more. Then he said softly, more to the sky than to anyone else, "We're just getting started." The car pulled away down the winding road, and as the house grew smaller in the distance, the first rays of morning broke through the clouds, spilling golden light over the roof, the porch, the old garden, and the tree that stood taller than ever. It would keep growing, just as she'd intended. Now it's your turn. What's the most mysterious lesson someone ever taught you? Share your story in the comments below. And what story should we tell next with Keanu? Let us know, because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones the world needs most.